Caving can be an exciting and adventurous activity that rewards explorers with incredible sights, thrills, and new discoveries. However, squeezing yourself into tight and narrow spaces not only can come at a gamble, but unfortunately can turn into a terrifying ordeal that could end with a tragic ending. In today's video, we're looking at some sad and horrific cave-in accidents that will definitely give you claustrophobia, so you've been warned. Hello, I hope you guys are well, and if you're new, then welcome and please make yourself at home. My name is Morgan and this channel is storytelling of the disturbing, mysterious and supernatural. So if this kind of content is your thing, then don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for weekly videos. But for now, grab a cup of tea and get cozy as we're about to begin. Nutty Putty is located in Utah, America, and was first explored back in 1960 by Dale Green and friends. The cave, aptly named after its soft, brown and putty-like texture of the clay found within its passages, quickly became famous for its narrow and slippery passageways, twists, turns and squeezes. Parts of the cave also have some imaginative names to them, including the Birth Canal, the Aorta Crawl, the Scout Eater and the Maze. John Jones was just 26 years old and studying to become a pediatric cardiologist. He had recently become a father and his wife was pregnant with their second child. John had plenty of cave-in experience as a kid, where John's father frequently took him and his younger brother Josh on cave-in trips all over Utah. Born into a large family of 5 boys and 2 girls, he also has 60 nieces and nephews. Despite his cave-in experience when younger, John hadn't had much recent experience. But on November the 24th, 2009, him and his brother Josh decided to pick Nutty Putty Cave as their next cave-in adventure, and despite the cave's narrow corridors and small tunnels, the cave is considered to be a good cave for beginners. They began their adventure at around 5 p.m, joined by 9 friends and acquaintances, and everything was going smoothly for about an hour or so. After the party had explored the largest room in the cave, aptly named the Big Slide, John, Josh, and 2 of their friends decided to take up a challenge they had heard about. This included passing through the Birth Canal, a narrow and challenging passageway that eventually opens up into a larger room. John went first, wriggling forward for some time, but after not seeing any larger area, he continued to inch forward, but the narrow passageway did not come to an end. Instead, the squeeze made a sharp downward turn. Confidently, John pressed forward, perhaps noticing the tunnel got wider at the bottom, but as he slipped down into the tunnel, it was already too late. He couldn't get himself back out. Now, it is unclear if John entered the Birth Canal and accidentally turned and wriggled into the Scout Eater, or if he missed the Birth Canal entirely and crawled into another passageway just next to the Birth Canal called Ed's Push. Either way, Ed's Push does not lead to a larger room, nor does it actually lead anywhere. Ed's Push has 4 uncharted passageways at its end, but they are all too small for a human to fit into. The narrow crevice he was trapped in measured only 10 by 18 inches, which is like trying to crawl through the size of a front-loading washing machine hole, except it wasn't a perfect circle, and he was stuck at the tightest point of the opening. John was trapped more than 100 feet below the ground and deep inside the cave. His brother Josh, who was following him, was the first one who found John. He tried to pull John out, but only managed to inch him up a little, and as soon as he let John go, he slid right back into the crevice. John was stuck in the crevice with one hand pinned underneath him and the other one forced backward. His ankles and feet were free, but were of little use as gravity was pushing him down. His brother Josh hurried back to the ground above as fast as he could, slowly wriggling out of the tight passage and returning to the surface. Once outside, he quickly called for help while their friend stayed with John. Susan, a local rescue volunteer, was the first to receive the call and dropped everything and headed straight for the cave after receiving the message on her pager. She arrived sometime around midnight, but it had now been more than 3 hours since John was trapped deep inside the cave. Being small, agile and quick, Susan took no time to reach John. "Hi John, my name is Susie. How's it going?" "Hi Susie, thanks for coming," John said, "but I really want to get out." Susan, seeing the gravity of the situation, called for extra help, and within the next few hours, a large rescue team was at the scene discussing and brainstorming a plan of action to try and get John free. They decided to use a rescue rope that passes through a series of climbing cams, with one end of the rope tied around John's legs and the other pulled by the team. At the same time, they also tried drilling away chunks of rock near John, but the hard material and the awkward position made drilling slow and painful work. In over an hour, they only managed to drill through a couple of inches of rock. However, the position that John was in made things extremely difficult. As he was trapped nearly upside down, only his feet were visible to the rescuers, and the ceiling above his feet was too low to be able to just pull him directly out. As time passed, the rescuers unfortunately failed with the first system of climbing cams. Desperate to get John out as quick as they could, they then tried their second plan to use a rope pulley system, anchoring the pulleys with bolts and drilling the bolts deep inside the cave walls. Despite the large team of rescuers and medical services, as well as a rescue helicopter waiting outside the cave, because of how narrow the cave was, meant that only one person could access John at a time, who had now been trapped upside down for 19 hours. Because of gravity with his body in an upside down position, John was not faring well. His heart had to work extra hard just to keep the blood out of his brain, but he was also having difficulty breathing and was swinging between calm and panic. During trying to release him from the confines of the cave, rescuers brought a two-way cable radio to him and managed to lower it to him so that he could speak with his wife, who was at the cave entrance. Finally, the plan of the pulley system seemed to pay off, and they started to pull John out, with 8 men all pulling as one. A few pauses had to be made, due to John being in great pain due to his long-held inverted position, but bit by bit they pulled him out until at one point he was lifted enough to make eye contact with one of the rescuers. John looked tired, with red eyes, and his face was dirty, but he was still smiling. "How are you?" the rescuer asked. "It sucks. I'm upside down. I can't believe I'm upside down. My legs are killing me," John said. The team decided on a quick rest before pulling John the rest of the way out and to freedom. But unfortunately, before they could, disaster struck. As the team of rescuers pulled on the pulley system for the 4th time, the whole team suddenly fell backward, and the rope went loose in their hands. Something hard hit the face of the closest rescuer to John, and for a second he blacked out. When he came to, all he could see was dust. When the dust settled, he could see that the stone arch near John's legs, where the rope was tied around, had completely broken apart, and the key bolt had also broken off. They then realized that John had slid right back down into the crevice again, but this time even deeper than before. The rescuer, who had been hit in the face with what turned out to be the metal carabiner when it broke away, couldn't continue due to severe facial injuries and had to switch places with another rescuer on the team. The rescue efforts were slipping away, and they realized when they reached John again, his breathing was shallow and less frequent. They called out to him again, but there was no response. One of the rescuers, desperate to see if John was still alive, also got stuck trying to lower himself into the crevice, but after wriggling himself free, he drilled a new hole for the pulley and crawled out. Exhausted from the ordeal, he switched with another man who went down to try and make contact with John, but again no response was made. At midnight on November the 25th, a medical professional who reached John pronounced him dead. It took 137 rescuers in total who worked for 27 hours straight to try and save John's life. After an intense rescue effort, they tragically left empty-handed. The authorities the following day deemed the rescue mission too dangerous and difficult to retrieve the 26-year-old's body, so Nutty Putty Caves remains John's final resting place. Our next story takes us to Thailand, where tragedy struck for a group of tourists who ignored warning signs about caving during the rainy season. Tam Nam Talu Cave Complex, and I hope I said that right, is situated in the stunning scenery of south of Thailand's national park, with lush rainforests surrounding the caves containing striking limestone formations and subterranean streams that are popular with tourists. However, because of Thailand's rainy seasons, the caves are only accessible during specific times of the year. The province's governor, and I'll probably pronounce his name wrong, so I apologise, Winnie Profadi, said he had ordered the park to close during the current rainy season. "We have signs both in English and Thai warning tourists not to go into the cave during heavy rain," he said. One tour operator who had been taking visitors to the national park for 8 years said waters can rise quickly without warning, and that they only began their cave tours at the end of October and up until the second week of May when it was safe to do so. However, for this group of tourists and their 2 Thai guides, they were soon to realise the dangers of ignoring the warning signs. British woman Helena Carroll, who was 21 years old from Birmingham, and her fiancé John Cullen, 24 years old, had been tossing up the idea of saving for a house or going on holiday. Eager to escape England's gloomy skies, they set off to Thailand, and up until that point it had been a dream holiday and the most beautiful place they had ever been to. The caves were just another adventure to tick off on their holiday bucket list. It was mid-October in 2007, and the excursion involved a boat trip on Shoreland Lake and an hour-long trek through the ancient rainforest before reaching the mouth of the cave. The group descended into the cave using torches handed out by their 2 guides, and as they moved through the cave they saw spiders and bats, and all was going smoothly. But their caving adventure was about to turn into the worst possible decision they had made on that holiday. They were halfway through the cave when they suddenly heard a roaring sound. Unsure of what was making the noise, Helena looked behind them to see a torrent of water rushing towards them at great speed. Unknown to them, while they were inside the cave, heavy rains had started falling outside the cave, which also happened to be near a waterfall, and the flash floods had almost instantly consumed it, spilling over into the cavern. Panicking and desperate to get to higher ground and out of the way of the surging water, Helena and her partner John started climbing the cave wall, but watched in horror as other members of the group, including a tour guide, a 10-year-old German boy, as well as a Swiss couple and their 2 daughters, were dragged away by the torrent. There was nothing they could do. As the couple scaled the wall, Helena slipped, but John grabbed her back just in time and pulled her back up. They climbed higher and found a ledge, but were alone in the dark, their torches swept away. Scared and with no idea of what to do, how to get out, or if anyone would even be looking for them, they debated on their next move. John believed that they were going to die if they stayed put, while Helena thought their best chance of survival was to stay put on the ledge. John then decided he would get into the current and flow with it to what he thought would be an exit, so that he could raise the alarm and bring help. As he slipped back into the water, he let go of his fiancée and was swept away into the darkness. All alone, Helena clung to the ledge, cold and listening to the rumbling water as it passed through the cave. It was many hours later when she saw a bright beam from a torchlight and shouted out to alert the rescuers who had managed to access the cave. As rescuers pulled her out, she frantically asked a nearby television crew who were filming the rescue mission if her boyfriend was okay, but she was only told that many people had been found dead 8 hours before her own discovery. She was taken to a makeshift mortuary and found John's body in a box next to one of the little Swiss girls. Helena was the only survivor of the group who had all perished in the flash flood. 6 tourists and 2 Thai guides lost their lives that day, and it remains unclear of why the group were in the park to begin with, especially considering the dangers of the rainy season still being present and the park being closed. Back in the early 20th century, an era also known as the Kentucky Cave Wars, cave explorers and property owners competed against each other to exploit the bounty of caves for profit from tourists who paid to see these natural wonders. An avid cave explorer, William Floyd Collins, became a media sensation when he got trapped and died in a narrow coolway 17 meters below ground while working to try and enlarge a small passageway in Sand Cave. In 1917 and 1918, Collins had previously discovered and commercialized Great Crystal Cave in the Flint Ridge Cave system. However, the location was remote and visitor numbers were low. However, he had the ambition to find another cave that he could open to the general public, one that was closer to the main road for easier access and, hopefully in turn, bringing greater profits. He entered into an agreement with 3 farmers who owned land close to the main highway, that if he found a cave, they would form a business partnership and share in the responsibilities of operating this tourist attraction. January 30th, 1925, and Collins was working on expanding an entrance that would later be known as Sand Cave by the media. He had managed to squeeze himself into several narrow passageways. one which was no larger than 9 inches depth, and claimed he had discovered a large grotto chamber, although this was never verified. But after working for several hours on the cave, he became trapped while trying to make his way out of the cave. Knocking over his oil lamp, which was his only source of light, he moved his foot to what he thought was a stable section of cave wall. However, it shifted and a 12-kilogram rock fell from the cave ceiling, pinning his left leg, as well as a torrent of loose gravel that came down, burying his body. It wasn't until the following day that he was discovered missing by worried neighbours and found that he was trapped in Sand Cave. Word spread quickly, and his younger brother Homer soon arrived to the scene, and was the only person able to make it through the narrow passageways to his brother, but was unable to release him. On February the 2nd, rescuers decided on a hoist system to pull Floyd from the cave. However, the attempt failed and caused further injury to Floyd when it pulled his torso directly up and against the ceiling of rock above him. It was decided to instead dig him out by removing the rocks that surrounded him. An electric light was also run down the passage to provide lighting and some warmth against the cool winter air. The sad scenario of Floyd's rescue, however, created a media frenzy that grew to become the third largest media event between the world wars. Newspaper reporter William Burke Skeets Miller from the Courier-Journal in Louisville reported on the rescue efforts from the scene. Miller, who was of small stature, was actually able to remove a lot of earth from around Collins to be able to interview him during his ordeal, receiving a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage and playing a part in Collins' attempted rescue. Miller's reports were distributed by telegraph and were printed by newspapers across the country and abroad. And the rescue attempts were followed by regular news bulletins on the new medium of broadcast radio, the first broadcast radio station, KDKA, having been established in 1920. However, shortly after the media arrived outside the cave, hundreds of inexperienced cave explorers and tourists gathered due to the attention that this disaster had gained, and at one point numbered in the tens of thousands. The somber situation actually ended up creating a circus-like atmosphere, with Floyd's neighbours selling hamburgers for 25 cents and other vendors setting up stands to sell food and souvenirs, profiting off this disaster. To add to the mayhem, and because of the cold season, campfires were lit, but actually disrupted the natural ice inside the cave, causing it to melt and create puddles of cool water, one of which Floyd ended up lying in. With no further advancement on his rescue, on February the 4th, the cave passage collapsed in 2 places due to the melting ice. Attempts were made to dig the passages that led to Floyd out, but the rescue leaders deemed it too dangerous to do so. Instead, they began digging a shaft straight down to the chamber behind Floyd, instead hoping to access him that way. Because the cave drew air inward, it also meant that no engineered equipment could be used to dig the cave because the fumes would suffocate Floyd in the process. So the 17-meter shaft would have to be hand-dug downwards using pickaxes and shovels. 75 volunteers got to work digging on what was estimated to take 30 hours to reach Floyd, who had already been trapped for more than a week. Although the first ton of dirt moved easily, the shaft then became so narrow that only 2 workers could work at the same time, and to make matters worse, at 15 feet down they hit boulders and had to use pickaxes and a series of pulley systems to remove rocks. Floyd was finally reached on Monday, February the 16th, 17 days after his entrapment. Miner Ed Brenner, who was the first to reach him, found Floyd cold and apparently dead. After a National Guard medical officer was unable to reach the body, Ed Brenner followed examination instructions by the officer for an official death declaration, and it was estimated that Floyd had been dead for 3 to 5 days, with February the 13th the most likely date of his demise. Floyd's body remained in the cave while funeral services were held on the surface. However, understandably, his brother Homer Collins was not pleased with Sand Cave as his brother's final resting place. So 2 months after, he and some friends reopened the shaft. They dug a new tunnel to the opposite side of the cave passage and recovered Floyd Collins' remains on April the 23rd, 1925. Floyd's body was then taken that day to Cave City from barmen at J.T. Gerald's and Brothers Funeral Home, and then his body was transported to the Collins family farm and buried on the hillside over Great Crystal Cave, which Lee Collins renamed Floyd Collins Crystal Cave. The homestead was later sold, and the new owner distastefully decided to dig up Floyd's body to place in a glass-top coffin to be displayed in Crystal Cave for all the public to see. Many years after, however, on a night in March, the body was stolen and later recovered in a field with the injured leg missing. Because of this further disrespect, the remains were then moved to a secluded portion of Crystal Cave. They were placed in a chained casket, and years later, the Collins family objected to Floyd's body being on display for all to see, and he was finally buried at Mammoth Church Cemetery. Mosdale Caves in Yorkshire, England has a reputation that strikes fear into many cavers. First discovered in 1941 by Bob Leakey, the cave is geologically fascinating, where the caverns are really two caves in one. A very challenging cave system that's prone to flooding, with many passages involving long wet crawls, while other sections can be neck deep in water. Many of Leakey's explorations were conducted solo, as few others had the necessary endurance, and some say that it's comparable in caving terms to reaching the South Pole. The end was finally reached again, but not until 1964 by Mike Boone and Pete Livesey, and a return trip to the far end takes between 8 and 10 hours, so it's not a cave that you'd want to get stuck in. But Mosdale really became famous when tragedy struck in 1967 on June the 24th. On that fateful day, 10 cavers entered the system, aged between 17 to 26 years old. They were from 3 separate caving clubs, so had experience, but none with Mosdale except for Dave Adamson, who led the group. The weather at the time was good, however the forecast not so much. Thunderstorms seemed likely, and after 3 hours, 4 members of the party decided not to continue and made their exit at around 5 p.m. leaving the remaining 6 cavers still inside who weren't due back until around midnight. The remaining 6 young men are already 2 miles into the labyrinth of Mosdale Caverns, passing drown or glory swims, rough and knee-wrecker passages, and a 900-foot narrow tunnel called Marathon Crawl, accessible only by wriggling sideways in the stream. Hours from the entrance, but with spirits still high, they head for the end, hoping to find new passages, unaware of the terror that will soon await them. Morag Forbes, who had exited the cave earlier, along with Jim Cunningham, John Shepherd and Colette Lord, decided to wait for her fiancé Dave Adamson, who she was to marry the following month. A few drops of rain had started, but nothing to be worried about as she waited it out in a nearby barn. The other 3 who had also left the caves had made their way back home, but while Morag waited, the rain became torrential. She checked back at the cave entrance and was alarmed at how fast Mosdale Beck was rising. Returning again at 9 p.m, she was sickened to find a lake of swirling water covering the cave entrance. Realising the dire situation, she ran 2 miles to Yanbury Farm, where the farmer called the police, and by 11:10 p.m, a rescue had been organised. Cave rescues were commonplace for the Upper Wharfdale Fell rescue team. However, the scale of Mosdale Cavern was not one they had previously faced. Add to this the fact that because of Mosdale's size, there was no blueprint for the cave. The 2 leaders of the operation alerted the bigger cave rescue organisation, and within minutes phones were ringing to alert fellow cavers of the situation they faced. Arriving at Mosdale, the cave had completely disappeared underwater. Hopeful rescuers sat around, but no one knew where to begin, especially since the cave wasn't even accessible anymore. Fire engines and tractors pulled up to the moor, and hundreds of helpers banded together to dig a diversion ditch, 6 feet wide by 10 feet deep by 300 feet long, and then built a dam. The structure was unstable and had to be reinforced with 10,000 sandbags, but by late Sunday morning, and with the help of 19 fire pumps, the water level had started to recede. The rescue team was led by Jim Eyre, at the time one of Britain's most admired cavers, and was ready to begin the mission. Jim had actually been invited by Dave Adamson just a week earlier to join the expedition. However, Jim was convinced the cave was a death trap and had declined the invitation. Now he found himself leading the rescue in the hopes that his prediction wasn't correct. As well as several other rescuers, they were joined by Jim Cunningham and John Shepherd, who had been part of the group who had luckily decided to make an early exit. They were advised not to join the rescue because of the traumatizing situation, but they were desperate to rescue their friends. As they entered the cave, flood debris covered the cavern. They crawled to Rough Chamber, a room-sized section of the cave that they could stand up in. However, the passages further on were water-filled. Tony Waltham, a London-based wanderer, had rushed to the cave to help, and Eyre had elected Waltham to move forward to the 900-foot crawl, which was only 10 inches high and 2 feet wide. However, as they pushed on, they came across the nightmare they were hoping to avoid. The first 2 bodies jammed the passage, and just beyond were 3 more dead. 5 in total. The 6th group member was however missing, John Ogden, who was an expert cave diver. The team members, dismayed at what they saw, were all told to leave the cave. Desperate to find the last member of the group, who they believed could still be alive, the rescue leaders consulted Bob Leakey, who had first discovered Mostel 26 years prior. Leakey led another rescue team into the cave early on Monday morning. Passing the 5 dead bodies still remaining in the passage, he went beyond, but the dam outside was too unstable and he was forced to retreat. It was his last cave-in trip. Determined to know of John Ogden's fate, the cave was combed again Monday night and Tuesday, with another seasoned rescuer, Brian Boardman, leading a 6-man team for a final attempt. Hopeful there was still a chance of the young man's survival, that hope was finally lost when they saw a boot protruding from a fissure. The narrow cleft was so small it looked almost impossible to climb, but Ogden had somehow fought his way in there to escape the rising waters that he probably knew would take his life. It was a devastating outcome. Hundreds of people outside had tirelessly worked to try and save the young men trapped, and the result was heartbreaking. Reaching the corpses took 5 hours alone, and the retrieval seemed impossible. With the rain outside still falling and the dam still unstable, the coroner spoke with the parents of the deceased, police and rescue leaders, and ordered to have the cave permanently sealed and respected as a grave. Despite the cave being officially sealed in 1970, friends of the victims managed to access the cave to move the remains of the dead to a higher level cavern that was later named the Sanctuary, out of the reach of floodwaters. However, for Dave Adamson, Jeff Boru, John Ogden, Colin Vickers, Bill Frakes and Michael Ryan, these experienced and promising cave explorers have Mostel as their final resting place. Well, that's it for today's video, but let me know in the comments if any of you go caving and if you've had any scary experiences yourself. These stories are certainly sad, but also an important reminder that nature is not to be underestimated. Thanks so much for joining me, and don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe for more weekly content. But for now, I'll see you guys in the next video.